Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Red Deer Hospital's surgery program on the brink of collapse, according to doctors who are asking for emergency funding. Plus, thousands of PEI residents remain without power 10 days after Fiona sweeps through the region. And 125 people are dead in a stadium crush in Indonesia.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks for joining us. Close to 16,000 residents of Prince Edward Island say they're growing exhausted, anxious, and cold as they remain without power 10 days after post-tropical storm Fiona swept through the region. Some in Charlottetown say they haven't had power since 1 a.m. on September 24th, and it's making life increasingly difficult as they cope with falling temperatures and a lack of heat or light. Maritime Electric says the island's power grid held up well overall, but crews are still doing their best to respond to a storm that caused damage across the province.
And I want to assure you that with Hurricane and with Fiona, that we are absolutely focused on making sure that we get the power back on to everyone and that no one's leaving until we're there. Today, we have 216 crews from Fortis BC, Fortis Alberta, Fortis Ontario, Newfoundland Power, and all in between from coast to coast to help Maritime Electric, as well as New Brunswick Power, Summerside Electric, H-Line, and others. Contractors are boots on the ground, as we say, at Maritime Electric. So our goal is to have thousands more on today and tomorrow.
Days after Hurricane Ian carved a path of destruction through Florida, officials are making it clear the road to recovery from the storm will be long.
We currently have about 5,200 of your fellow citizens, our soldiers and airmen, mobilized in the impact area supporting over 11 counties. We're able to put forces in on those barrier islands. So you'll see engineer equipment, soldiers and airmen, and support elements moving into those barrier islands to set up security, work with law enforcement to ensure that we're not only taking care of those citizens, but that we're securing that area.
To those that can receive water, 50% of Lee County I want restored in 72 hours. This was as of 10 o'clock yesterday morning. 50% restored in 72 hours. I want 75% of that the individuals that can receive water restored in 5 days, and I want 100% of those that can receive water returned by Sunday, which happens to be the same day that electrical individuals say that they will have most of the restoration done to homes that can receive that.
Several Alberta doctors have penned a letter to health officials saying the surgery program at Red Deer Regional Hospital could be on the, quote, brink of collapse. The 5-page letter was addressed to Health Minister Jason Copping as well as to Alberta Health Services and was signed by 6 of the hospital's chiefs. Doctors are asking for emergency funding to recruit more anesthesiologists as well as a review of stipends and overhead relief to retain anesthesiologists and surgeons at the hospital. They're also looking for increased training positions for nursing and anesthesia. The Alberta government is providing nearly $21 million over the next 4 years to implement recommendations from a STAR-led task force on human trafficking. Country singer Paul Brandt, chair of the Alberta Human Trafficking Task Force, personally thanked Premier Jason Kenney during the funding announcement Sunday at Edmonton International Airport for his willingness to prioritize the issue.
As a result of the training provided to Alberta 211 operators launched in January 2021, we've seen an increase in human trafficking-related calls. The number has more than doubled from the past 2 years combined. 2022 is on trend to match or surpass this number. Through the combined efforts of the Safer Way Out initiative here in Edmonton and Not in My City in Calgary, the concept of safety network coordinator positions has been put in place to support the work of the North and South alert teams. It has been our dream that special focus and permanent funding would one day become a reality.
The money will establish an office to combat trafficking as well as a center of excellence for research and data collection. Recommendations the government accepted when the task force presented its report in March. The money will also support grants for community projects as well as staff to support victims and survivors during human trafficking investigations. UCP leader candidate Danielle Smith is making one last push in hopes that she'll become leader of the Conservative Party this week. During a media availability over Zoom, Smith recalled some of the biggest issues she has campaigned on, including her stance on Ottawa. Smith says we need to keep pushing back against Ottawa, adding the federal government keeps making decisions that damage Alberta's economy.
They also have made decisions that have made life unaffordable, and we've got to do everything we can to protect our citizens. In addition to that, the issues around healthcare and how we improve healthcare is an everybody issue. I've been talking about that on every stop, as well as health spending accounts and making sure that we are bringing our young ones up to grade level in their coursework. So I can't control what the media decides to cover. I know that you've been very interested in one part of my platform, but I assure you those are the issues that I have campaigned on from one part of the province to another, and those are the issues that I'll be able to bring in.
We find out who the new leader of the UCP is on Thursday, October the 6th. Over the weekend, the province announced new funding through an action plan that will target homelessness in the province that includes $1 million and 70 additional winter shelter spaces. Premier Jason Kenney says through the government's homelessness task force, they believed more enhancements were needed to address the issue.
The money will be used to expand the number of shelter spaces, especially for the winter months, in priority communities like Edmonton, Wetaskiwin, Lethbridge, and rural communities where there's an urgent and unmet need. We'll be moving all provincially funded shelters to 24/7 access to make support available day or night.
Meanwhile, Director of Community Services for the City of Lethbridge, Mike Fox, says this is welcome news from the province.
I was very excited to hear that, hearing that the province is they're a key partner in this area. So I was very excited. Yeah, winter is always the most challenging for any area that faces the climate swings like we do in Canada. And if we can find an additional 70 beds, we will be in a much better situation come this winter. However, making sure that we have a location and that it's set up proper could be a challenge, and it's only a couple months away is when winter is coming.
Over the next 2 years, $63 million will be provided to areas across the province to implement the government's Homeless Action Plan. Bill Ginther, the executive director of the Lethbridge Soup Kitchen, believes the new homeless initiative from the province won't do much, as he says he hasn't seen much action from the province or the city. Ginther believes a better alternative would be to implement a long-term housing solution, especially during the winter months.
We can solve the housing if we only say yes to a facility. And right now we're saying no to every facility. I have watched people die in the cold. I've seen people have their fingers amputated. And so, you know, there's an urgency. And the urgency clearly is to house people, but you have to have some ideas. You can't just say, here's some money, go and do it. If they get the right people to do it, something would happen. But right now they don't have those people in place.
Ginther adds he has seen the number of homeless people increasing. Well, members of the Governance Standing Policy Committee in Lethbridge questioned the city's communications department recently. Currently, the department has 10 staff members that work for the team and an additional person who works as a communications strategist for City Council. Tara Grindle, the communications manager for the city, made a presentation on the Community Engagement Program budget initiative with an option for 4 tiers for the committee to look at, which talk about future budget deliberations for the department. Tier 3 was asked to be approved, which accounts for an additional $24,000 to be allocated during 2023, with funding increasing to $56,500 by 2026. Tier 3 also asked for an additional 0.5 full-time employee to be hired, along with funding for paid advertising and community engagement, along with a community checkup phone survey to be approved. The motion was passed, but not all members of the SPC were happy about the decision. Councillor Ryan Parker called the request alarming, citing concern about the future growth of the department.
So at the end of the day, as a representative of the community who communicates with the community, I have to justify when we add full-time employees, because when you add full-time employees, you don't take them away. I can't recall a time when, maybe we went through the KPMG report, we've done some cutbacks and all that, but we're asking this department to grow another 30%, over this next budget cycle. And so as a politician, what I'm saying is when you ask other departments to live with less and do more, and they've achieved it, and to some cost and some sacrifice, and there's been consequences, I see this department as scope creep. I see this department growing more and more.
Meanwhile, Tara Grindle says the department put in 191 hours of overtime between May and June alone. The motion will be brought forward to City Council to ask City Administration to prepare operating budget deliberations, looking at all 4 tiers for the 2023 to 26 budget. Lethbridge police apprehended a 31-year-old man Sunday morning following numerous reports of a person acting erratically and running in and out of traffic on Highway 3. Around 11:45 a.m. just east of the river, the man was located dodging traffic in the east and westbound lanes. He did not comply with commands provided by officers and at one point attempted unsuccessfully to enter a private vehicle that had stopped at the scene. The man was subsequently apprehended under the Mental Health Act and transported to hospital with no charges laid. Fans of the Beatles who have been waiting to see one of the iconic band's former members will have to wait a little longer. Ringo Starr has canceled 5 Canadian concerts beginning tomorrow through Sunday after testing positive for COVID-19. The former Beatle and his all-star band are promising to reschedule their concerts in Winnipeg, Saskatoon, Lethbridge, Abbotsford, and Penticton. The band issued a statement saying that Ringo hopes to resume as soon as possible and is recovering at home. Axe throwing has continued to gain significant traction in the sports world. A total of 44 people made their way to Lethbridge on Sunday to participate in the 2022 Burn Battle fundraiser, which was an increase of 8 compared to last year. As BCN's Micah Quinn reports, throwers put on a clinic hoping to hit their target of raising funds for the Jack 80 Cancer Center, which will go towards purchasing life-saving equipment and educating staff to give them the tools they need to help fight cancer.
The mixed round-robin double elimination tournament was hosted by True North Axe Throwing in Lethbridge. Axe throwers were decked out in their best pink outfits during the event, with a theme from the hit movie Mean Girls. Austin Campbell has been throwing axes for 3 years, but really started to get into the sport professionally in the last year. Campbell says the community within axe throwing is the best part.
And there's people I've met at tournaments where see them, first time ever meeting them, instantly like that, we're like family. It's just, it has that bond. Everyone's just super accepting no matter where you come from that. We're just here to throw axes, have fun.
Amy Overs, an avid axe thrower herself, an organizer for the event, says the sport of axe throwing is not just gaining popularity in Lethbridge, but also around the world.
So for us, you cannot even make one mistake because the competition is extremely high. There's always new venues popping up all over. We're in Canada, the States, UK, Australia, and I believe there's a few other countries in Europe that are also in the axe throwing. It's just going on fire.
Amanda McKenzie, a member of the host committee for the fundraiser, showcased this beautiful axe, which was available as a raffle item.
So it actually changes color, so I was holding it with my hand, it changes color. It's got skulls, it's gorgeous, and if you buy raffle tickets, all the donation money goes to the Cancer Foundation. These were all donated, but you just have to bring cash in, you buy some tickets, and just pray that your number gets picked, actually.
In 2021, the event raised $3,000 for the Jack 80 Cancer Center. So far in 2022, around $5,600 has been raised so far, with additional numbers to be tallied by the end of the week. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
And speaking of cancer, a statue of the late Dale Hawerchuk was erected in Winnipeg Saturday, just outside of the Canada Life Centre. The executive chairman of the Winnipeg Jets says the original plan was to have Hawerchuk attend the unveiling of the statue of himself. But Mark Chipman says Hawerchuk's health declined very rapidly, and the former professional hockey player lost his battle to stomach cancer in 2020 when the Hockey Hall of Famer was only 57. Crystal Hawerchuk, his widow, told the ceremony Saturday that Dale was told about the statue shortly before he died, and he was humbled by it. The statue was sculpted by Eric Bloom, who also sculpted statues of Wayne Gretzky and Michael Jordan. Winnipeg's Iranian community gathered in Fort Garry over the weekend to plant trees in honor of the victims of the Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752. The flight was shot down by Iranian missiles just after takeoff from Tehran on January 8, 2020. 63 Canadians died in the crash, including 9 people from Manitoba. Arianpour says a total of 176 trees will be planted in Scurfield Park, one for every victim of the tragedy. A plaza is also planned. Tensions in Iran have continued to escalate as the country experiences widespread protests following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. Earlier, I spoke with Lisa Daftari of the Foreign Desk about how Iranians are standing up against their government, including the country's soccer team, which recently covered their uniforms at World Cup as a way of protest. Other Iranian celebrities have been using their platforms to speak out against an oppressive regime.
Many of those who have platforms, singers who have, 40 million hits on their songs on YouTube and Instagram, their pages have been taken down. They've been detained. Obviously, political opposition leaders and actors, actresses, whomever is using their voice to really campaign for freedom is being rounded up. And for that reason, I think we're seeing more brave Iranians come out. Instead of silencing them, it's really influencing others to be brave, including the soccer players who covered up their jersey because they don't want the Islamic Republic flag to be shown at the World Cup.
You can catch that full interview with Foreign Affairs correspondent Lisa Daftari following business news. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly met Friday with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Washington, D.C., not long after President Vladimir Putin vowed to claim 4 regions of Ukraine as Russian territory. Joly and Blinken were clear that won't affect the West's efforts to help Ukraine win this war.
Obviously, we do not recognize it. We do not want to give any form of legitimacy to it. And therefore, this won't change our military strategy. And so that is why we'll continue to send weaponry. And I would say mainly where Canada's expertise is training of Ukrainian officers. We have done that since 2014. Before the war, we had trained already 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers. And so we are partnering with the UK on this, and we are training out of the UK many of the Ukrainian officers.
Ukraine has every right to defend all of its territory, to defend the people who are there, and to take back territory that was illegally seized from it in the first place. And our support to Ukraine will continue, and that support can be used as Ukraine sees fit throughout the country to defend its territory and as necessary to take it back.
A Russian court has set October 25th as the date for American basketball star Brittany Griner's appeal against her 9-year prison sentence for drug possession. Griner is an 8-time All-Star center with the WNBA's Phoenix Mercury and a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. She was convicted on August 4th after Russian police said they found vape canisters containing cannabis oil in her luggage at Moscow's airport. The Moscow Region Court will hear her appeal. Hundreds of soccer fans held a candlelight vigil on Sunday outside Indonesia's largest sports stadium in the capital. At least 125 people died in a crush after police fired tear gas in an attempt to stop violence after a soccer match Saturday night, leaving fans running for the exits. Witnesses say fans rushed to the field to demand answers for the first at-home loss to the opposing team in 23 years. Riot police responded by firing tear gas, including towards the stadium's stands, causing panic among the crowd. Some people suffocated and were trampled as hundreds of people ran to the exit to avoid the tear gas. It's a horrible scene there. Well, we need to take a quick break, but when we return, I'll tell you all about the sunshine. We'll be seeing it for a while. The full weather report is next. Welcome back. Well, it was a gorgeous, beautiful, sunny day in Lethbridge today. And you know what? That actually is going to last. We've got beautiful sunshine, clear skies all week. We did reach a high of 23 today, which was higher than what we expected. And tomorrow, we're looking at another high of 23 degrees on Tuesday. Sunshine right through the week. High of 18 Wednesday, 19 on Thursday, 22 degrees on Friday. Down to 19 again on Saturday, and then back up again to 23 degrees on a Sunday. Now, according to the almanac, the average high for this time of year should be 17 degrees, so we're going to be basically above that all week. Average low, 3 degrees, 30 degrees. That was our high temperature on this day back in 1943. And in 1950, it was a chilly -7. Okay, the sun rose today at 7:34 a.m. Sunset this evening, 7:07 p.m., giving us just under 11 and a half hours of daylight. So about 11 hours and 27 minutes. So we're definitely feeling those days getting shorter. As we look to the national forecast, the highs across the nation tomorrow, as I was looking through this, you know what? It's not going to be rainy. It's not going to be cloudy anywhere across Canada tomorrow. Lots of sunshine on the west coast tomorrow. 19 degrees the high, a bit foggy in the Juan de Fuca Strait there. 20 degrees in Vancouver, bit of cloud coverage in the afternoon. Not too bad though. High of 22 tomorrow in Edmonton, 23 the high tomorrow in Calgary. Beautiful sunshine. Across the rest of the prairies, we're looking at mainly sunny skies as well. High of 23 tomorrow in Saskatoon, 22 degrees in Regina. Regina seeing a bit of fog in the morning, but that's going to dissipate for sure by noon, giving you mainly cloudy skies and also a nice sunny day tomorrow in Winnipeg. As we look to the central part of the country, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, seeing sunshine all the way around. 20 degrees the high in Toronto, 19 in Ottawa, and a high of 18 degrees tomorrow in Montreal. As we look to Atlantic Canada, also seeing mainly clear skies out there. 18 degrees the high in Fredericton, 17 the high in Halifax, 16 in Charlottetown, and a high of 14 degrees in St. John's, Newfoundland. Canada is just the perfect country tomorrow. Weather-wise, there you go. That's your forecast. The Calgary Real Estate Board says home sales declined last month from a year earlier, but the benchmark price was still up. The board says home sales totaled 1,901 in September, down nearly 12% compared with the same month last year. The board says new listings declined by 10% compared with a year ago, while inventory levels were nearly 21% lower. Benchmark prices were up 11% compared with the same month last year and up 6% compared with the beginning of the year. How are things looking on the economic front for Lethbridge and southern Alberta? And how are businesses faring with the challenge of finding workers to fill job vacancies? Well, we caught up with Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, to find out.
It's actually the highest level of job vacancy we've ever seen. So more than 6,000 jobs in our region are left vacant. They're jobs that exist that employers would fill tomorrow if they had a candidate. So that's very concerning. That's, again, a very high number. And so, two things come from that. First and foremost, if you're a business or a manufacturer or even an agricultural operation and you don't have enough labor, you may have to scale back production. You may have to curtail your business, which is a concern. And then, how are all of those jobs going to be filled? Where's that labor coming from?
You can catch my full interview with Trevor Lewington, CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, in the second half of the show. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 436 points on the day to finish at 18,881. The Dow was up 765 points to 29,490. The S&P 500 was up 92 points to 3678, and the Nasdaq was up 239 points to 10,815. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 414 to 83.63 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 30 cents to 6.47 US. Gold was down 7 cents to 16.9982 US per ounce, and silver was even to 20.71 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.97 per bushel. Barley is at $9.36. Canola is at $19 per bushel, and corn is at $12.19 per bushel. Live cattle were up $1.05 to $144.33. Feeder cattle were up $1.35 to $175.53. Lean hogs were down 45 cents to 88.78, and the Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours at 73.41 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, life is getting increasingly difficult for Prince Edward Islanders who haven't had power for 9 days. 26-year-old Kaylee Graham hasn't had power at her Charlottetown apartment since post-tropical storm Fiona hit. She says she's trying to cope with cooling temperatures and a lack of heat or light. As of midday today, Maritime Electric was still trying to restore power to about 16,000 customers. Coming up after the break, Foreign Affairs correspondent Lisa Daftari discusses how tensions between the U.S. and Iran are continuing to increase following widespread protests after the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. If you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Handmade Market Spooktacular Edition is taking place Saturday, October 22nd at Exhibition Park in the South Pavilion from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Discover unique handmade treasures from over 100 artisans. Come in your favorite Halloween getup and take part in the costume contest. There's also a scavenger hunt and opportunities to win amazing door prizes. Admission is $5 per person and kids under 14 can enter for free. For details, visit lethbridgehandmademarket.ca. Big Brothers Big Sisters in Lethbridge is looking for volunteers to mentor children and youth in their various programs. Volunteers commit to 1 visit per week for 1 year. They have many kids that are looking for a big brother or sister. Make a difference in a child's life and start something big. To apply, visit lethbridge.bigbrothersbigsisters.ca. And for more information, call 403-328-9355. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Tensions between the U.S. and Iran have continued to increase as Iran experiences widespread protests following the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. And now it looks like the Iranian regime is firing back in so many ways. Here to discuss this is our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Lisa Daftari, who is the editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk. Lisa, thanks so much for being with us again today.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Okay, so Lisa, Iranian legislators are now retaliating by chanting death to America, death to Israel. And on Sunday night, Iranian security forces were trapping and shooting at university students who were protesting Amini's death.
Yeah, it's horrific what's been going on for over 2 weeks. Iranians have come out onto the streets all across the country to protest the death of a 22-year-old, as you mentioned, Mahsa Amini, who was arrested by the so-called morality police. They are just entrusted with the task of, stopping women who are showing their hair or not wearing the Islamic headscarf properly. She was taken into custody, and government officials claimed that she died of a heart attack when in fact eyewitnesses know that she was beaten and suffered head injuries, slipped into a coma and passed away. Of course, there are protesters who are not just protesting her death, of course, which was the catalyst in this case, but trying to tell the world that this is enough of this government. They've had this regime for 43 years, ever since the toppling of the Shah in the Islamic Revolution of 1979. No freedoms, especially for women. This is called a feminist movement because the women are leading this and taking off their headscarves in public, which again, punishable by at least detention, if not death in the case of Mahsa Amini. Truly telling the world that this government does not match who we are. These are not the freedoms that we want and deserve. And they want the world's support. And on their part, the government is cracking down brutally. This has always been the Achilles heel of this government, is the people. Because imagine, they came into power in 1979 because of a grassroots movement, people coming out onto the street. Of course, they had international help at that time, with many world powers supporting a revolution, and they don't have that at this time. We're hearing silence from the West because the US and European nations are really still hoping for an Iran nuclear deal, which is really absurd when you think about sitting at the table with such a brutal, vicious regime that doesn't afford its citizens human rights, but yet the United States and the European nations want a handshake with them. They want to release billions of dollars to them that they're going to put into, killing their own people and putting into regional terror, like groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and others. So this is what's going on. It's really basic. There's good guys and bad guys involved. And of course, we are here to really amplify the voices of the Iranian people and tell their stories, because they're not allowed to do so. Their internet is shut off. It's punishable by death. They're not allowed on Telegram or WhatsApp or Instagram, places where they tell their stories. And we are trying to tell and be their voices and tell their stories.
And Lisa, you were quoted on Fox News about this particular story. Obviously, you have a lot to say about it. You're very passionate about it, but you're quoted as saying that this regime's campaign to blame other countries for the protests is not surprising at all.
No, it's not, because they always try to find the scapegoat, right? When you think about the MO, the method of operation of this regime going back to 1979, they quickly got involved in the Iran-Iraq war, and that helped them really make this boogeyman out of the West and say, we need to rally around the flag because we have the big Satan, which is the United States, and the little Satan in our region, which is Israel. And they made this kind of, we need to stick together. We need to support our new government, which is this Islamic regime, because of these bad guys out there. But the Iranian people, they've had 43 years to process this and understand very quickly that the bad guys are actually in their own government. And that's what they're saying. They actually tore down street signs, and the street signs that they tore down, it's very, very telling. One was the Palestinian Avenue, and the other was the Islamic Republic Boulevard, which is very interesting. What they're saying is, you've been telling us lies. We have nothing to do with the Palestinian people. We're not against Israel, and we are not against the West, and we're not for the Islamic Republic. So their calls for freedom are very basic. They want to be wearing what they want, practicing the religion that they want, dating whomever they want, and they don't have these basic freedoms.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing the people rise up, and of course, as a result of that, the regime is arresting celebrities and artists now, not to mention foreign nationals. We're also seeing the Iranian soccer team cover up their uniforms at World Cup as a way of protest.
Yeah, truly brave of so many of these Iranians, and many of them have been arrested. And we know that it's quite dangerous to be detained in Iran. It can lead to death. There's no due process. Obviously, there will be trumped up charges, and many of those who have platforms, singers who have 40 million hits on their songs on YouTube and Instagram, their pages have been taken down. They've been detained. Obviously, political opposition leaders and actors, actresses, whomever is using their voice to really campaign for freedom is being rounded up. And for that reason, I think we're seeing more brave Iranians come out. Instead of silencing them, it's really influencing others to be brave, including the soccer players who covered up their jersey because they don't want the Islamic Republic flag to be shown at the World Cup. And they wore black in solidarity with the protesters to say, this is not who we are. We're behind the Iranian people. We don't represent our government, even though we're here in a nationalistic way, right? At the World Cup, everyone wants to show their flag, whether it's Canada or the United States or whichever country you represent. And here are the soccer players saying, we represent the people. We don't stand behind our government. It's truly, these are acts of courage, again, punishable by detention or even worse. And the Iranian people are standing up to tell the world that, we've had enough and cover our story, really tell our story. And I thank you, Jeanette, for bringing attention to this, because they've really been very frustrated by the lack of media coverage.
Wow. Okay. Also, Lisa, this is very interesting. So hackers have discovered the police officers responsible for Amini's death. So they've released their names, their birth certificate numbers, their parents' names. So what do you think could result from this exposure of the officers' names? Do you think that people will retaliate against them and their families personally?
It's a great question, because really it's almost like, we had that George Floyd moment here in the United States, for example, right? And, it wasn't as though the government or the police department stood behind that crime. They called it a crime and they wanted to investigate and to see what happened. And, obviously there's two sides to every story. There was a criminal, and then there was the police activity, and then there was an investigation. Again, due process. In Iran, we're not seeing the government separate itself or create any distance between the morality police or the specific officers that were involved in this crime and themselves. So that's why the people, does it really matter who those officers were? The government is standing behind this act, and they would do it again, just like they're rounding up more women. It's not as if this was a one-off. This was not a one-off. This was not a one-time incident where you can say, well, here's the information about these officers, and now we're all good if justice is carried out against these officers. That's not the case. Since Mahsa Amini's death, many other women protesters, innocent protesters, have either been rounded up, they've been pulled by their hair, they've been beaten on the streets. I put up a video on the foreign desk of one woman with 9 officers beating her on the streets of Iran. And for what? For peacefully protesting. So again, it's not as if this is a one-time incident with Mahsa Amini. There have been many, many Mahsa Aminis after that in the last 2 weeks and in the last 43 years, for that matter. So I think the grievances, and again, there's many catalysts that bring Iranian people out onto the streets in the last 43 years. If you remember, there was the Green Revolution of 2009 that was over a fraudulent election. There have been egg protests. They call them gasoline protests. They call them all kinds of protests. But when the people come out, the slogans are the same: death to the dictator, we don't want this government anymore. So again, the catalyst can be different. And this time, again, the death of a 22-year-old, but the crimes have been the same and they've been consistent for 43 years. And that's what the people are saying. This is not a one-off. We are protesting the entire government.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, let's turn our attention now to another part of the world. So Lisa, China is operating police stations around the world to monitor Chinese citizens abroad. So what can you tell us about this?
Obviously, they are a police state, both inside the country and outside. The surveillance systems that they have inside China, even within Hong Kong. Now they want to have, political dissidents reported. They want people to be telling on each other. They want to monitor their activities. And of course, now we know that they want to monitor their activities all around the world. China has a very specific way of inserting itself in all different sectors to have this ability to surveil. So they have, spies within American universities. They have spies within Congress and Senate. They have their spies within different technology sectors where they can have copycat technology and they can take it back to China. And now we know that they are spying on their own citizens, almost like a policing of their citizens. This is the way that they gather information. This is the way that they make sure that they stay in power and they stay strong and that they don't have political opposition grow against them. And they are able to really ascertain a lot of information in different sectors by having this police state mentality all around the world. But the question remains, how are we going to stop them? How are we going to rid their influence and really cut their hands short of having their influences in our part of the world? And that's really the wake-up call here, is to say, how do we get them out of our labs, out of our universities, out of government, and all of the different sectors that they have penetrated and have been able to get information from?
Wow. Okay, Lisa, Venezuela has freed 7 American prisoners in exchange for the release of 2 relatives of President Nicolas Maduro's wife. So what can you tell us about this? I understand they were convicted of drug smuggling in the U.S., right?
Right. These are drug lords that were convicted of smuggling drugs. They are related to Maduro's wife, and that's why they were high profile. And obviously, Venezuela wanted to have this swap to get them out. I don't know if they were ordinary citizens, if they would have the same luck. On the part of the United States, these were 5 Citgo employees that were lured to come to Venezuela for a so-called meeting. And as they wrapped up the meeting, they were detained and they've been held for 5 years. So it's a horrific story. Obviously, it's not an equal exchange by any means, but obviously those are, innocent prisoners that were held. And of course, I think the United States had every incentive to get them out. But on the part of Venezuela, yes, a lot of nepotism there to get them out because they are related to Maduro's wife.
Oh, wow. It's unbelievable that stuff like that is actually happening. Okay, so closer to home then, the University of California, Berkeley has a controversial bylaw made up by a pro-Palestinian group saying that it aims to stop the spread of Zionist beliefs. So on Friday, they created Jewish-free zones, which bans even the school's Jewish dean from speaking. I can't believe this is happening on U.S. soil, Lisa.
On U.S. soil in the year 2020. I mean, it's unbelievable that this is happening in our time, and all that we do to fight segregation. And now on one of the most prestigious universities in the world, let alone the United States, and a state school, by the way, Jeanette. This is not a private school. I mean, not that this should be allowed anywhere, but the fact that it's a state school and taxpayer money goes to this school for them to create a free zone of any kind, whether it's by race or religion or anything, is mind-boggling. And what's more crazy is that these are supposed to be the most elite and progressive and enlightened institutions in the world, and here they are, moving backwards in terms of who they let on campus, how they control the campus. But I'm not surprised. These pro-Palestinian groups are bullies. I know from personal experience. I was scheduled to speak at Rutgers University, which is my alma mater in New Jersey, in 2018, and I wasn't invited by a fringe organization. I was invited actually by the chancellor of the school to give a speech, ironically, on freedom of speech on campus, and a pro-Palestinian student and group canceled my speech by, again, bullying tactics. They threatened the school, they threatened me, they started a petition spreading lies about, how I will speak about hatred, even though, again, the speech was scheduled by the school, the topic was decided by the school, and it was canceled. And the reason I bring up this example is because this is what they do to control the narrative on college campuses. And it's up to these schools. Again, Rutgers is also a state university, up to the schools to stand up to these bullies and say this is a freedom of speech zone, not an anti-Jewish zone, not an anti-Lisa Daftari zone, not an anti-anyone zone. This is a free school. This is a freedom place where we, again, promote freedom and freedom of speech, freedom of religion and everything else. So it's absurd. And again, I thank you for highlighting this story, because I haven't heard anywhere else. And we have it, of course, at the Foreign Desk. And it's something that we should really be, sounding the alarm on, because, again, crazy that we're talking about this in this day and age.
All right. Well, it looks like we are about out of time now, Lisa, but so great to have you on once again. Appreciate it as always.
Thank you for having me.
As we get into the autumn routine, how are things looking on the economic front for Lethbridge and Southern Alberta? Well, joining us to discuss this is Trevor Lewington, the CEO of Economic Development at Lethbridge. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Trevor. Great to have you back with us.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeanette.
Awesome. Okay, so Alberta has, of course, benefited from the boom in oil and gas prices. Now, even though our Lethbridge area economy isn't totally dependent on oil, to what degree has the energy sector affected business here?
Well, I think it's important for all Albertans to remember that, of course, the oil and gas sector drives a huge chunk of our economy and therefore government revenues. So even though some of our industries don't benefit directly from that upswing, when the provincial government does well, institutions in our region, like our two post-secondary institutions, do benefit. Typically, municipalities get access to more money, so it's always a good thing when the oil and gas sector is performing well. But many of our local manufacturers and a lot of our service industries, for example, engineering, do a lot of work in the oil patch, not necessarily around here. But we have lots of businesses that sell up into Fort McMurray, sell up into other areas of the province. So again, when the oil patch is doing well, oil and gas drives a lot of activity in our region, even though it's sometimes hidden and people don't see it necessarily.
And, unfortunately, it does look like electricity and natural gas prices are going to be staying high heading into winter. Not exactly a good news story, but what impact could this have on the economy?
Yeah, certainly for consumers, electricity and natural gas is expected to stay high, certainly all the way through the winter. They're expecting rates to increase significantly as we move into the winter months. Constrained supply, continued conflict, particularly, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But just certainly general instability in the market. So, for consumers, if you're on a regulated rate option, now is a great time to look for a fixed rate plan and try and protect yourself from that uncertainty. Businesses, of course, very concerned about the increasing costs of utilities, how that's going to impact their processes, how that's going to impact their plans. And we'll see that rolled into prices, unfortunately, which just adds to potential further inflation. So certainly, electricity and natural gas, a big concern and a potential drag on the economy as we move forward.
Absolutely. What are you hearing from the agribusiness sector? How are things looking there?
Yeah, this was a great summer from a primary agriculture perspective. Most commodity prices are at or near record levels. What I heard for the most part is, particularly in our region with the strength of irrigation, of course, yields were very strong. So you have most producers getting, higher than average crop yields, more stuff to sell, and they're able to sell it at even higher rates than usual. So that combined put a lot of money into the economy.
Sadly, of course, demand is up around the world, particularly because of the situation with Ukraine, a very strong producer in the European continent, and there is definitely a global need for more foodstuffs. So our region has an opportunity to benefit, albeit under not great circumstances, as markets respond and prices continue to go up.
We seem to have a lot of expansion going on here in Lethbridge. Is the construction industry still continuing strong? Seems like it is.
Yeah, great question. It's a bit of a mixed bag, honestly. So housing starts, for example, are actually up overall compared to the same time last year. But we've seen a bit of a switch. So it's not as many single family homes, it's more multifamily. So duplexes, apartment buildings, those kinds of things. And there aren't as many large industrial projects. So if you think back a few years ago, we had construction at the university with the Science Commons. We had construction at the college with their big building, a number of large industrial projects. We don't have that at the moment. So although the sector is doing well, although there's some activity, employment in construction is actually at its lowest level since 2017. So that's a bit of a concern, something we'll be watching. Even though there is activity, like I said, employment hasn't quite responded the way we thought it would. So something we'll have to keep an eye on.
Okay, interesting. There is definitely some expansion going on at our Lethbridge Regional Airport. So how is that expansion impacting Southern Alberta?
Yeah, so I think it's great news. Obviously, a functioning airport that connects us to the rest of the world is always important from an economic perspective, attracting business, but also attracting visitors. For folks that haven't been through the airport lately, much more modern facilities, expanded lounge area with a washroom after security, which was great progress for us locally. But what it's driven, in fact, is WestJet has added now 3 flights a day, so increased service by WestJet to our market. And of course, starting in December, we'll see Flair Airlines fly directly between Lethbridge and Tucson. So it's great to have that sort of vacation destination added to the list, and hopefully we can attract more of those ultra low cost common carriers and those charter flights. And so as a result of that, even more work is happening at the airport. They are looking at rehabilitation of some of the pavement, potentially expanding some of the runways. So if you're driving by, you'll expect to see lots of activity at the airport in the coming months.
Interesting. Very exciting, too. I used to live in Tucson, so some of my best friends are still down there. So I was very excited.
Now you have an easier way to go visit.
Exactly. So I was excited about that one. Okay, so besides the airport, we've also seen a large expansion taking place at Exhibition Park. So how is that living up to expectations?
Yeah, the Exhibition Park project, the Agri-Food Hub, is a very exciting project for our region. It'll give us a world-class facility where we can host literally any global event. So I know the team at Exhibition Park is looking to attract new conventions, new festivals, new kinds of programming for the building. So that's good news. We always like it when new and more visitors come to our community to spend their dollars. Yeah. The project itself, was originally slated for about a $70 million investment. So that in and of itself is a huge contributor to the local construction sector. And from what I hear, they're on track to complete the building on time next spring. We'll start to see events in that beginning next summer, which I think is very, very exciting.
Oh, super exciting. Exactly. It'll be interesting to see the change in Whoop Up Days, too, coming next year. Excited for that. So, Trevor, have you heard how the surrounding Southern Alberta communities are doing? Are they doing better or worse than Lethbridge?
Yeah, I think it's a mix. Again, it's a mixed bag. Most communities that are, rooted in agriculture, of course, have done well. I think many small communities like Lethbridge are struggling to retain family physicians. And so there is a bit of a demand in the healthcare sector, which, I think gives people pause for thought about whether they're going to relocate to a smaller municipality. So attracting and retaining talent, attracting and retaining residents is always an important consideration for rural communities. And so availability of physicians and access to healthcare is part of that. But there are a number of projects that are happening in municipalities around us. You look at some of the work that's happening in Coaldale on a joint sport facility and new school. Very exciting for their community. We've seen some industrial expansions in Tabor. Lots of interesting things happening along that Highway 3, Canada's premier food corridor, so it's known. Lots of investment and activity happening along that corridor. And we've also seen lots of renewable energy projects in our region. So there's many solar and wind things that are happening. So if you've driven along the region's highways, especially in the last few weeks, there's a lot of large turbine parts moving around, but there's many, many more projects in the pipeline. It's about $9 billion that's forecasted to be invested in our region over the next couple of years in renewable energy. And so
that's driving a lot of activity for these smaller and more rural communities in our region.
Okay. What about employment? How are businesses faring now with the challenge of finding workers to fill job vacancies?
Yeah, that is probably my single largest concern as we move into the fall. We're just working through the job vacancy numbers right now, but the preliminary report that I saw yesterday, it's actually the highest level of job vacancy we've ever seen. So more than 6,000 jobs in our region are left vacant. They're jobs that exist that employers would fill tomorrow if they had a candidate. So that's very concerning. That's again a very high number. And so, two things come from that. First and foremost, if you're a business or a manufacturer or even an agricultural operation and you don't have enough labor, you may have to scale back production. You may have to curtail your business, which is a concern. And then, how are all of those jobs going to be filled? Where's that labor coming from? So there's much more work to be done. I think it's linked in part to the fact that our schools and post-secondary institutions were effectively shut down for 2 years. And of course, there was remote learning, but many students chose not to pursue their education during that time frame. Also, immigration was, of course, curtailed during the pandemic, very restrictive in terms of temporary foreign workers, and even people just trying to move between countries was obviously challenged with global airline access and all the public health restrictions. So a big concern moving forward. I think it could be a real drag on the economy. And so we need to do a little bit more research into what specifically those numbers mean and where they're coming from. The sectors that are most affected at this moment appear to be things like equipment operators, truck drivers, and the skilled trades. So again, a concern because those are not jobs that you can simply replace with. You wouldn't want me trying to replace a skilled tradesperson, for example. I am not the electrician you want working on your building. So they take time to develop those skills, and it's important we figure out how we accelerate that pipeline of talent.
Right. It might be a good time to be young and job seeking, perhaps. There's a lot open.
It is absolutely a job seekers market at the moment,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. Okay, so there, now that Lethbridge's mayor and council has had almost a year to settle in, what kind of feedback are you hearing from business owners? Are they confident in this new leadership team?
Yeah, I think, what I'm hearing generally is that people are pleased there's a focus on the economy and being business friendly. So the new council did set out an action plan at the end of last year, right after they were elected. And they have their number one priority on their list was economic development. So they are very focused on job creation. They're very focused on becoming more business friendly as a community, which I think is good. There's a commitment to that. I do think the business community is very concerned about increasing costs that might come from either changes to utilities like garbage and water and sewer, or in fact, property taxes. So, as businesses are dealing with inflationary pressures on wages, or they're facing inflationary pressures on things that we've already talked about, like electricity and natural gas, the last thing a business wants, of course, is more costs passed on to them through higher taxes from a property tax perspective. So I think that's going to be the real pressure on this council is how do you balance all of your demands and all of your needs for new services and the costs the city itself is facing with this sort of general belief or this need from the business community to hold increases as low as possible. It's going to be a real challenge for council.
Wow. Okay, we've talked about different sectors. What about manufacturing? How are things shaping up with the manufacturing sector?
Yeah, our manufacturing sector has done extremely well over the last couple of years. So exports from our manufacturing sector last year, so 2021, were just over $1.23 billion. And that was actually a 49% increase over the previous year. So massive growth in manufacturing here in our region. Some of that is because what we produce, a good chunk of it is value-added food, which of course the world needs more than ever. And food, even during a pandemic, of course, there's growth in people staying at home and having snacks. So we saw that. Many of our local manufacturers actually expanded their operations and added capacity. The other thing, of course, right now is you've got a bit of a currency advantage. So if you're an exporter, the cheaper Canadian dollar makes your products more affordable, especially if you're sourcing most of your ingredients and materials locally. So you can take advantage of those things. We have seen a massive surge both in manufacturing exports, but also in capacity. So that's exciting. That drives jobs in the economy, and hopefully we can continue to build on that success.
Yeah, for sure. Positive news there. Okay, we talked about the construction sector industry. So with that in mind, are we seeing any changes in the real estate market now with interest rates rising?
Yeah, obviously interest rates are already having an impact and potentially have a much more significant impact moving forward. We have not seen it impact residential house prices or necessarily the number of houses that are selling. We're starting to see more homes stay on the market longer. So, months of inventory has started to grow. But so far, the impact has been pretty minimal. I think as interest rates continue to climb, they are forecasted to keep increasing, that will add more pressure to the market, and you will see people potentially either defer their decision making till things stabilize, or perhaps consider an alternative. Perhaps I'll rent longer and perhaps not move into that first home purchase. So we haven't seen the true impacts yet. There's always a bit of a lag between when interest rates rise and when people make decisions. But I think that will continue to be a drag on the economy, and we will continue to see an impact in the housing sector in particular as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. And then, Trevor, finally, what are your thoughts on where the Lethbridge economy is headed over the next 6 months?
Yeah, the great thing about doing forecasts is you're always wrong, and I think that now more than ever, this is a very volatile time. There's a lot of pressures, as we've talked about, from interest rates to utility costs. There's a lot of volatility in the world from a geopolitical perspective. So lots of questions about Russia's next steps and the impacts on Europe, particularly as we head into the cold winter months. Yeah. But fundamentally in Lethbridge, the raw ingredients are there. So our economy is very diversified. We have great talent. We have great, training and education systems. We have strong exporting businesses. The fundamentals of our market are pretty solid. So we're well positioned to weather the storm, but certainly lots of interesting challenges ahead, no question.
All right. Looks like we're about out of time, but Trevor, thanks so much for being with us today. Awesome to have you on always.
Always appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Trevor Lewington is the CEO of Economic Development of Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.